I'm going to get started. So thanks for joining. This is the 18th Big Picture webinar, and we investigate and explore a topic with engagement at the centre, polarised between people development and business development. But today we're going to look and do something we've not tried before. Michael's come back in, and I think if you've all been able to get into the board. Hi, Michael. Well, I'm sure he'll find his voice as soon as I get into full stretch. In the board, in the top left, the big picture board, because we're all using Zoom, and I'm using Zoom really for instruction and guidance, and also so we can see each other. So that, in a way, is our ability to connect as we would as humans in the room. That's our eyeball technique. But I've invited you into the big picture digital kit, which is the board. And what this allows us to do, it allows us to collaborate. So we will get on to employee blind spots, and in order to investigate them in the way that I want to, and for you to make connections that you may not have previously made, then I need to give you some basic information about how big picture works and some of the meanings. So in the top left, you'll see a box in the top left of the board, and it's got our successful business. So imagine that is a successful business, and what I'd like you to do between yourself, and I'm really going to let you do this and self-organized, is I would like you to place the 6 symbols that you see there in relative importance to a successful business. So in any way that makes sense to you, just move those symbols, and any of you can move any of the symbols, and hopefully they're self-explanatory. Can you order those symbols in a way that makes sense to you in terms of relative importance to a successful business? And I'll leave you to do that for a few minutes.
Well, we just have a little tug of war to see, I want to move it here, and someone else says, no, I need to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the same thing I experienced, yeah. And then it threw me out of the board, Martin.
Oh, okay.
So I had to log in again. I don't know what that was.
And when you say a hierarchy, what do you mean? Do you along the customer service journey or under the box?
No, just do, all we're doing for now is using that top left of the board. So don't think about, we're just using that box in the top left. So if you were to think customer was really important to a successful business, then you would place customer really close, like here. And if you were to think that technology was less important, you might place it over there. So we're just using an area of the board to gain familiarity with the symbols and the use of the functionality as well. And I'd like you to work together on it and maybe just come to some agreement about the relative importance of those 6 symbols.
Okay. So I've moved all over the place to be a pain in the ass.
Well, oh, so money's come back now.
Yeah, I've just put them back. Yeah.
Well, I think the customer and the team for me are very important. Without the customer, you don't have a business. Without the team, you can't service them. But without money, you don't have a business either. They're all very. It's interesting because they're all pretty important. But I don't see how you can have a business without customers.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that it comes from the context as well, because I guess it depends on where the business is in a life cycle as well. I guess, if you had to put importance on things, sometimes money is always important, but that's an outcome of a great business in my world. It's more the fuel.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're a startup, money can be very, very important because you're always running out of them. But if you are a more mature business, it's more about how you leverage the money for the next 10 years in a way. Just my immediately thought. But yeah, all these things are important when I work with businesses in a way. But again, I think it's team and then customers are very important. I think that the legacy businesses I know and I study, they're very good at the team and the customer bit and finding out how to build links between that on any stage of their business. and then the rest will follow in a way. But yeah, it's interesting.
Okay, so can you just move the symbols to kind of reflect that that view that you've just shared, that Michael, or do you think it's there already, or?
I was sitting with the team and the customer and putting them into operation, because that's where, you know, often the experience on both sides are created in my world, and often it's either a sign of great operation and systems and processes and leadership that works, or it's the opposite, you know, it's not working in a way, and the conflicts will happen between the team and the customers in a way. Yeah.
Okay. So we think team and customer, I'm looking in the top left, team and customer are the two most important. Interesting, they're both people-based symbols. We've got process kind of next to that, and then money a bit further away. And interestingly, technology stayed where it is, which is a bit further away. So we're looking there at a kind of reflection that people is at the center of the businesses that we like to work with, and maybe successful businesses as well. So that seems to feel right. There's no real right or wrong answer to that. The reason I do that is just to gain familiarity with the functionality, and also that you also think about maybe the symbols, the meaning of the symbols and what they mean, because big picture is very much when it comes alive and is most exciting is when people other than me make connections for themselves. And what I've found is, in order to do that, I can only do that if I pass over knowledge of what the symbols mean. So I call it Windowsill Facilitation. I'm giving the people in the room normally the knowledge of what the key elements of the business is, and that's my 25 years experience to say these are easily understood, instantly recognizable things that people can talk about, and you don't need to have a background in business to be able to do that. So it's very much bottom up and emergent. I also then move on into the way the board's laid out. So if you just zoom out maybe a little bit, you'll see, and we've talked a little bit about it, there is a little zoom thing in the bottom left. You'll see that David was asking me before you joined, just in our pre-chat, why is it things that are grayed out on the page? And that's because if you want to encourage people to engage, then I like to give them a framework and a guide. But what I don't really like to do is to constrain them so much with what I'd prefer them to do is to fill out the big picture template over the top. So we're going to explore that a little bit, and focusing on employee blind spots to share a little bit of related experience. In the context of the board, I think there are maybe certainly two types I see fundamentally, which is a blind spot where there's an area of the business that may not be within the radar or the vision of the particular individual. So if I start pinching some of these symbols, if I've got someone there working in customer care that I've just moved over.
Mark, why don't you just share the board in the middle of your screen, then everyone can see it and we don't have to keep jumping screens.
That's interesting. Now, the reason I don't want to do that is because I want to give you access so you can all move the board. If I share it, then we can broadcasting
move them in the background when we move them, but when you're talking, then at least I can see you. Otherwise, I'm trying to look at you at two screens, and I can't do two screens at the same time.
Okay, well, don't look at me. Put me to the back. It's less important that you see me. It's more important that you see the board. I know you like looking at me maybe, but don't do that. Put me to the back and do that.
Okay.
I find when I share the board through Zoom, it creates this back to the future time ripple in the space-time continuum where you don't know whether you're looking at my board or actually active. The board is very much yours and you're working on it. So, but if you're in doubt and that's causing you an issue, just put Zoom to the back, and then unless someone's jumping up and down and waving, we know we're here and we can hear each other, but we don't need to see each other. So back to the board. If I related experience, one blind spot example, a general one might be if I have a team in customer care that I've just moved the team symbol to, that team might have a challenge because they're working in a silo and they don't have visibility of what's going in let's say supplier management at the top, or partners or marketing and sales. So what Big Picture does very well is create a gap analysis type piece where you can see the visibility of teams, and that's one general example of a blind spot. A second example would be where, I'll use the symbols again. I'll just put technology and money. You might not be the best example of this, but I've just put them together in the partners area. It might be that you're talking to somebody who has a particular background in technology and investment in that technology. And if that were to be the case, a blind spot for them might be around the people. So it might be that they're less interested in people and either the customer or the team. And therefore, those two types are what I see all of the time, and Big Picture enables me to be more sensitive towards people who have a blind spot that might be working in a silo or only looking at particular symbols. I'll give you an example. I think I know if I'm speaking to someone who has a background in marketing, because if I were to be talking to them, they might use those three measures. If I say to them, what are the key measures in the business? They're more likely to come up with measures that are to do with their marketing and may not come up with measures that are maybe more operational type measures. And that is almost like their DNA, their fingerprint, their mindset, their bias. There's loads of good stuff behind this to think, you've actually told me something more than you thought there. So it's not a Derren Brown mind trick, but what it is them saying the key measures for this business are all in marketing. Is that true, or is that a reflection of your background? So there are two. Before we get into the practical, I'll just throw that open. Is there anything anyone would like to add to what I've said so far with regard to their own experiences?
Yeah, I think people have an unconscious bias towards whatever their particular professional discipline is. And sometimes that really creates a blind spot for them. I was just thinking of someone told me a story yesterday about they work in customer care, new piece of technology introduced, organization spent a fortune on it, but actually it doesn't speak to the other pieces of technology, which means it takes twice as long for the people at the front line to do the job that they used to do with a much simpler system, but it wasn't as technologically sophisticated or new.
So if we were to use that example, Margaret, just let me try and translate that, because what I thought we'd try and do is take each of our examples and kind of interpret it. So would you mind just sharing that one again? And in this case, in this example, I'll interpret it as you're talking, and I'll just clear the board a little bit so I can do that. So just tell me again the particular example that you were using.
Okay, so the scenario is around the blind spot that people have for those who work in the front line of a business. So if you're in customer care, the example was a new piece of technology that people were very enthusiastic about has been introduced for the frontline staff. But because it doesn't speak to other systems in the business, it takes the frontline staff twice as long to do the same job. Nice.
Now, just on that, and it's a bit like that stage show where they say, we haven't prepared or done anything, have we, here, Margaret? But I didn't know that example was coming, but what I found really interesting is that you're almost, without almost realizing it, or maybe you're helping me out, you're almost aligning your language to the big picture symbols, because what I found it really easy to do was I interpreted frontline as customer care, because I think you mentioned that. I interpreted a technology symbol. I interpreted the blind spot as a challenge. And then I think you mentioned a measure. And what I find interesting there is, with very little kind of guidance and me leading, you've actually described something in a way that makes it quite easy for me to make that first level interpretation and to say back to you, and I can tell from your visual clues that there's bits of that you've made some connections there that work quite well. And to use that example, if it's working for others as well, although my familiarity with the symbols helps me to do that, the question I might go to Julia, to David, and to Michael to think about is, if I were to then try and turn that into an opportunity, firstly, I would say, do our other symbols, our process and money, have any role to play here? And whether they do or they don't, what might be the opportunity that's presented in the way that Margaret has described that blind spot in customer care? Would anyone, Julia, David, or Michael, like to offer a view of what an opportunity might be?
Well, I think it's interesting when it comes to technology, because a lot of, I've worked around a lot of technology the last couple of years, and we had advised on things. And the first thing is that people buy this flashy technology, but they haven't thought about the context and the people factors they're putting it in and getting it implemented and really make it work in the front line, as Margaret said, is actually going to add value. So here you have a situation where normally you put technology in to either, save time or make money. So, and you haven't done anything to these here, so you would have a massive loss of this project from a productivity point of view. So money in my world will have a massive impact here in a way. And again, nobody have analyzed the process. They just believe that the tech will improve the process. We're actually analyzing it. It actually will do it. So I don't know how far they have implemented it, or this is a trial. Yeah. But again, that's like what I hear from the story as well. Like, this is a classic example that you just blindly think that all technology is great. That's
lovely. And remember, we're stuck for time here, so I have to be quite blunt with the way I go about this. But what you've helped me do there, Michael, based on Margaret's recollection, is to say what I might do using big picture and take people with me. What I might do is say there is here a measure, if I just promote that measure to the right, that actually is important to link up to the purpose of what the company and the business is actually there for, to actually remind people that actually when this new technology is coming, it's being brought into a specific area of the business, but by tacking up to the purpose of the business and translating back down into a measure, then actually you can bring on these other measures around the customer journey. And maybe this is the bit where I love to kind of expand people's horizons, break the blind spot or take the blinkers off by helping people traverse or navigate up the customer journey and using the measures to pin off the key points of the customer journey that makes sense in the context of this blind spot. So you can go left, right, up, down, but it's me, just like Julia uses her horses to lead and to serve and those kind of things. It's a bit like giving people the ability to find that out for themselves and the kind of framework around that. I'm just leave that one hanging. I'd like to go into another example. We've got like 10 minutes left to apply another example. From a David and Julia perspective, we've got some symbols on there. Are there any other connections that you're making that would help out with regard to the opportunity that might counter Margaret's challenge?
It's interesting because I think Michael said it quite nicely, that there are some fundamental measures around the time it's taking the customer care team there's a massive disconnect with this new technology and the amount of time they're taking. So there has to be some rethinking of the customer journey or other systems. And what pops into my mind as well is the whole thing around, I don't know if it's relevant here, but what are the roles and responsibilities of the people, and what do the customer care team suggest? What are they going to suggest? Because they're the ones with the insights, and how can we tap into their knowledge? But is management open to listening to that? Because management have made the decision to invest in this shiny new product, and it's obviously not working. But how brave are the managers to be able to go, well, we've messed up here?
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you for that. What what I've just moved and interpreted there is you created a connection there between the customer care and the management. And I've just tried to clear the rest of the board, because what I see all of the time, and if you ever bring the money symbol down to here, is we've got two areas of clustering. So we've got the challenge within customer care of the blind spot that Margaret's presented. And we've also got the link to management that David's brought in as part of the opportunity. And we're just doing this quite briefly, so we're not making detailed notes around the symbols. But my hypothesis and what I see going on in a room the whole time is enabling the employees and the team involved to find for themselves these connections, enables the path to resolving and solving a lot easier, because you are facilitating them to find out for themselves. Firstly, it is a blind spot. What exactly which problems is it causing? What are the key connections? And you can do that by prompting using symbols that represent key elements of the business. And that's the hypothesis.
Okay, that raises a question for me, though, that hasn't been answered yet, which is how open is management to hearing the issues and acknowledging the measure of this is taking us longer?
Wow.
Margaret mentioned, because, you know, how big is their ego and what level is the psychological safety within the team for customer care people to speak up and tell the truth to management, to power?
Yeah.
And is there an environment which will allow that? Because most people in customer care will just mutter and grumble. And I heard a very interesting distinction yesterday from a customer care point of view, a service industry, which is there's an interesting distinction between moaning and complaining. And moaning is down the pub muttering about how awful everything is to people who can't make a difference. Complaining is actually speaking to someone who has the responsibility to shift what it is that you're complaining about.
That's lovely. I've never heard that before.
No, neither had I. And I think it's a really interesting distinction, because I think there is a culture in the UK of moaning rather than complaining.
Nice. That's lovely, that.
It occurs too, Martin, that what this shows you is where conversations need to happen.
Yes.
You know, so you've got real clarity. If you are a leader in this system, you know, there's clearly conversation that needs to happen between those two parts of the business.
Yeah, and what I've done, just reflecting, and what I'd like to, where you ended there, just with the two areas of the business, Margaret, I've just cleared up the board there to show that if we're just simply looking at two clusters for this particular example, those two clusters exist within the customer care where the original blind spot was described with its definition and the connections being made with the challenge. And it might be a tenuous and me pushing the conversation in a particular way, but because of David's introduction of the management's take on this and their ability to have that conversation and their mindset, I've placed the opportunity within management and administration. So there's two teams at play, and those two have to be connected. And that's very much, we've made a kind of at least two small connections there that would, if we did have the time in a room with the people themselves developing their own connections, that's the kind of engagement and problem solving mindset that I like to encourage. It's kind of a blend of engagement that was quite powerful because people are finding out for themselves. I'm aware of time. We've just got the 5 minutes left. Can I take one more? Who would like to offer example? I know, David, you said you had one. I know Michael's got one, and Julie's probably got an example as well. And we're stuck for time, so we can only do one.
I'm okay. The only thing I was going to emphasize again was where I often see there's a blind spot with regards to employees is the clarity of roles and responsibilities. And rather than being a list of tasks, which most job descriptions are, it's actually that we train our clients to think about outcome-based job descriptions, which list the outcomes that the job delivers rather than just the things that the job is supposed to do.
Okay. And may I ask, Michael, you've got a bit of familiarity with the board. If you're in there, could you try and interpret what David has suggested there. So he's talking about roles and responsibilities. So one question might be, David, is there one particular area of the business that you think that Michael's got a background in operations, so if we can use operations, that might be okay?
Well, we could use operations, but what I find, and I've worked now with a number of clients, is very much in the realm of where Margaret works, where it's surprising how few boards have clear roles and responsibilities of what they're supposed to be doing.
Yep.
I love that.
Including their operational role and their board level role. Because we're working with a client at the moment where there's an interesting debate about, okay, I have operational targets, responsibilities, and I'm leading my team, but I'm also a board member. What is my board member hat responsibilities and what are my operational responsibilities? And just distinguishing that has been a very interesting exercise and quite a lot of unpicking required.
Yeah, that's beautiful, David. And I saw Margaret nodding with the board involvement. Michael, you brought on a process symbol. Can you explain why you did that?
Because often, board meetings, I sit on 3 boards myself, and often you always say, we don't need a process for our board or any structure in that way because it's strategic meetings. And I say, well, I disagree a lot because if you don't have structure to your conversation, how are you going to ensure the right outcomes? So you need to find a way of, as David said, this is a classic example because I am in a situation right now where I'm sitting in a board where the big blind spot is that people don't understand their role. They don't want to talk about outcome. They just want to talk about putting out fires in a way. And they call it strategic. I just call it, putting out fires. And I think that a process for me doesn't have to be that you have big fat manual, but it could be like example where I think it works really well. On another board, we start the meeting out talking about what has gone really well and what have we learned since last time we were together from the actions we agreed. And actually that frames the conversation for a real-time board meeting in a way, and it takes away all this because a board meeting in my world is not operational conversation in a way. Operation happens in a different place. Board meeting is about how do we take the business further on. It's not solving operational problems. They should be solved in a different context. So this is about the future of the business. That's how I look at it, and that's what I try to frame. But this specifically team, we talk about operation all the time.
Yeah. And can I try and elegantly as I can link what you've just said to something that David said, which was about outcomes, Michael? Could that point there, that point that you've made, if we were to drag on, and we don't need to write the notes and the text in because we're just doing a little insight into it, but if we were to drag a measure in the context of an outcome into that, do you think by defining the measure stroke outcome, you could then focus through your people you were talking to, people onto the fact the outcome should be a moving the business forward outcome rather than a make us operationally better outcome? Because I think you said that should exist in a different place.
Yeah.
So you should have a measure in, if I may, you would have a measure in management and admin, but you would distinguish that measure from the measure that I've just put in operations. And by defining that, you are able to then mark out the territory, the difference between the two. I would just be exploring whether you could push that via the definition of the measure stroke outcome, in which case your point and David's point then could be understood, agreed, and used as a positive force.
Yeah, and I think it's often also the reason why these conflicts comes in my world is because of the lack of clarity within the team of direction and purpose of where we're actually heading as a wider team and what is our roles within that. So I think there is an element of that as well. But I think first of all that you need to understand when you go into a board meeting or more strategic meeting, we're not talking about is there water in this restaurant or not water in this restaurant right now. That's not the conversation. It's about where do we want to see the business in 3 months time, 6 months time. And actually you need to make sure you have, processes measure that, and you can only measure that by finding out, have you actually moved since last meeting? So what we do in the successful board I'm in, we work with something called OKRs, which makes it very focused on you measure what matters in principle, and we can see if we're moving forward or backwards every time we meet every month.
Are those that were covered in the book, Michael? Is that the Google?
Yeah, there's Google and Intel that started working like that.
I've seen that book. It's on my list. I just haven't got into it, but I believe
what's it called?
Measure what matters.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. So I've just cleaned up, thanks to that, I've cleaned up the board. There were just 2 examples there in time. The first example, shared by Margaret, into customer care, we made the connection with the key symbols of the technology. We identified it as a blind spot, but we also identified that actually management's ability to be able to understand, and it reminded me in my persona definition, I've got 3 descriptors. I've got people first, I've got values based, and I've also, the third one is companies that are able to act upon what their employees think. And I think there's a link there, because often I get thumbs up for the first 2, but I'm working with a company who is not in a position or able to act on what their employees think, and you just know that's going to cause a blocker somewhere down the line. And moving on to the second example, we've just worked on there, which is about David's roles and definitions. Now, the slight stumbling block for me, but I think we got over it, was that, is that any more relevant to one part of the organization than others? And that was quite risky for me, because if David or the room had said, no, it's all over the business, I almost find that lack of definition a little bit of a struggle to work with. So I was happy when David offered the view, and this happens all the time, give people the right framework and the prompts, and they will start offering you the kind of information that may not have come out if it was a question and answer type dialogue. It may do, but it may not, because the questions have to be really good. By giving people the prompts and the framework and a safe environment in which to express themselves, because we're human and we give each other the benefit of the doubt, people will be willing to share. And we've explored there with Michael's help. What I'd love to do in like a longer session is everybody offers examples or real life situations. Other people in the room are able to, what I call, interpret those. I'm sat on the windowsill at the back. And then the third point is, well, what do we actually do about it? But by then, the teams themselves are finding that out for themselves. And hopefully we've had just a little bit of an insight into that using the digital kit. I've got to bring it to a close there, because I want to keep these kind of prompts. Anyone watching this on the recording who would want a demonstration of this, that using either the sample kit for Big Picture or the digital kit, we are able to offer this, and we are looking for 3 partners to run a 90-minute business development session, where we'll start with the current focus of the team, using all the Big Picture approach, all the best facilitation skills and the digital kit, running through into future plans, which gives us much more time in breakout rooms to make these kind of connections, bringing it back to basics. We get really excited when people like ourselves can make connections and the wider team can find things out for themselves. If you go to yourbigpic.com, there's the kits, the workshops and the programs that we run. And I'm happy to end on any closing comments you would like to offer. And thank you for your time. Is there anything in summary you would like to give?
And I think it's really interesting how it can facilitate a conversation in a much safer way by objectifying the issues. So it's not my issue, my personal upset. It's out there, over there in customer care, and it's much more objective. And I really like the objectivity of it. I think it depersonalizes it, and therefore allows me to be more or less emotionally attached, so that I can think more with my brain, my prefrontal cortex, rather than just getting emotionally charged about it all.
Interesting. Yeah. And directing personal comments via a third party is not the right word, an inanimate, a prop, is easier than me pointing at you saying, David, I don't think you know what you're doing in marketing, rather than saying there's a challenge that is associated with maybe a performance issue in marketing, is an easier conversation to progress. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I like about that, and I agree with David, it's like it takes the blame out of a challenge or a blind spot. So you're not accusing anybody. You don't need to take the blame on yourself either. It takes all of that messed up feelings and emotions out of the situation and makes it, because it gives it some distance, makes it easier, I think, to address.
Excellent. Thanks, Margaret.
Good. Thank you very much.
Great. Have lovely weekends, Julia.
You too.
Have lovely weekends, Michael. Work on your camera angle, Michael.
Well, I'm not an actress, so I don't need to do that, Martin.
Indeed. But you might be one day. Don't rule it out.
No. Well, that's something
you never know where future income's coming from. We all know that. So anyway, enjoyed all your company. It's been a great lineup. Thank you. Have a great weekend. I'll be in touch next week with some feedback. Take care. Bye.
Okay, bye. See you all. Take care.
Bye-bye.